Hello, good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Excuse me. We're continuing in the book of Psalms in Psalm 24. I've got a song for that. Psalm, okay. A Psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's, and the fullness thereof, the world and they that dwell therein. For he hath founded it upon the seas, and established it upon the floods. Who shall ascend into the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? We'll hold there. In the first verse, hold on a second. I guess one of my computers is just buzzing. Probably need some attention. Sounds like one of the fans is making noise. It's kind of annoying me. Hopefully it's not loud to you. I don't think that's the computer. Oh well. Anyways, the initial a Psalm of David. The earth is the Lord's, the fullness thereof, and the world and they that dwell therein. Obviously, the earth belongs to the Lord. That's something we remind ourselves of, right? A lot of times we remind ourselves of certain facts about God. And it's comforting. You say, well, God's in control. You know, that's a comforting thought. God's in control. Even though a lot of people don't really believe God is in control, it's okay because, the human mind is not averse to making having somewhat contradictory thoughts in the head at the same time. God is control, and it's all up to us. And in that, I'm actually talking about free will, but that's not really what it's talking about here. But so let's not go down the hole of talking about predestination of free will. But like concepts like predestination, the possession of the world can be comforting in the thought that, there's a plan in predestination. In the possession of the world, it's that the earth is established on something big, that it belongs to someone who cares about it. You know what I mean? And that's the feeling I get when I read this. One interesting thing is I think about verse 2. And this is the kind of thing I can't help but discuss it because I know what the mind of certain people will do. This verse here, it's kind of interesting, right? Depending on how you read it, well, is it literally saying the earth, that the earth is resting upon water, like it's floating there? It's been founded upon the seas, established upon the floods. The whole thing is literally floating on this giant body of water. Now that's something sometimes people would read that and think that's what it means. Like he was getting that specific. And this is where people get confused about the Bible and science. Because the Bible isn't meant to be read like a scientific textbook. Because the men who wrote it had precious little scientific knowledge. They had some knowledge, though. And I find this thing interesting because, to claim the earth is founded upon the seas requires a certain amount of knowledge. Because, if you think of earth in terms of dry land, right? The dry land is founded on the seas. Obviously here, earth is said in opposition to sea. It's not meant to be like the planet Earth is resting on a body of water. That's that kind of reading is just, when I'm reading it like that, I'm kind of being intent, how do you say it? Like you're putting you're not taking into account the way that people thought who wrote these things. You're taking your mind and taking those words and then putting them into a modern sensibility of how the earth exists. But the dry land is founded upon the seas. You know what I mean? It's not floating on them, but it is sunk into it, isn't it? And down at the depths, was it, well, the land goes under the sea. Yeah, but, to even say this is interesting because as you exist in this world, you often see bodies of water, but they're surrounded by land. You know what I mean? Like, the closest sea to Israel, most of the closest bodies of water, the Red Sea, is nearly closed in by land, nearly, right? It's, it's not landlocked, but... And then the Mediterranean Sea is nearly closed in with water, and nearly closed in by land. The Black Sea, or the Caspian Sea, up in that other region, if they had knowledge of that, closed in by water. Like, the idea of saying the earth is founded on the seas does sort of imply the knowledge that the sea is greater than the land. You know what I mean? Because you found things on things that are bigger. You don't found something on something smaller. And that little bit of knowledge is interesting to me because there are it's in dispute how much ancient people really understood about the earth as far as just about the geography. There are some ancient maps that suggest that people very long ago understood that there was another continent on the other side of the world and that Antarctica existed. There are some maps, they're in dispute, okay? But to say something like that means that they saw the ocean as greater than the land. You know what I mean? This was probably in their knowledge. I find that interesting. You know what I mean? It just is. Because I don't expect, the Bible is inspired. But that doesn't mean that every word is going to be, God's going to say like, and what you think about this is wrong. So I'm going to correct that in your description of what I've done. You know what I mean? Because it sort of doesn't allow for any sort of poetic language at all. Because in a poetic sense, of course, the earth is founded upon the seas. You know what I mean? Every continent sits in the oceans. And above them. The earth is the Lord and everything, all the fullness of it. God is possessor of the earth, the world, and they that dwell therein. That is a critical thing. We belong to God. God made the world. God made us. And so we, as I often say, like, we owe God. I owe God a debt of gratitude. I certainly do. Some people may think they don't. Maybe their lives aren't what they suppose they ought to be. It's hard for me to look at my blessed life and say to someone whose life has been harder and say, you should be grateful to God. Nevertheless, I know it's true. You know what I mean? I know it's true intellectually. I don't know if I was in that circumstance if I could feel that way, though. You know what I mean? I understand the hardness of life and how embittering it can be, especially when you look at other people. When you look at other people who are more blessed than you. When you look at other people who have more things than you. You look at people whose lives have been easier, and you don't feel particularly thankful. You feel particularly envious, perhaps. You envy the wicked because they do so well. But it ought not be so. I consider myself very blessed. And, I've been told by people, like, I couldn't live like you. Like, as far as they thought the squalor was too great. And I don't think it's ridiculous. But that's how it is in America. They just, I see so many people, you get the whole couple working, and you do quite well. Both of them are working, and they do quite well as far as material goods. But there are other things they lose out on. Their children lose out on things. Having someone, around. I think the trend of the virus brought about of people working from homes is a good one. It'd be good to have more people working remotely and able to spend more time with their families, perhaps, and their children, perhaps to educate them at home, which, of course, I am in favor of. The schools, they make your children into something else. They try to make your children into students. Like, I just said, because it's like, I don't think I ever became one in school. The system wasn't built for me. It was built for me to succeed on paper. Because I got good grades all the time without trying. Because the system favored my kind of intellect. Where it's like, I had enough, I could just, B plus my way through everything without paying much attention at all. But I was not gaining from it what I should have. But there was other aspects of it which were just not good for me. I don't know, I would have benefited from homeschooling particularly. But some people may do better. It's like you don't know until you try. So we belong to God. There's a scripture that says, all the souls are mine. The souls of men, they belong to God. The inhabitants of the world, they belong to God. We all are His property. People don't like the thought of that. I don't belong to anybody. I belong to myself. You can also belong to yourself. Here's the thing about God is, like, though He made us and He owns us, He's also willing to let us just exist how we would to some degree. For most of our lives, we go in the world and we exist in a world. And the world is full of treacherous men and evil beasts and sickness and stuff. And we can live out our lives and live and die, and we don't have to have any interaction with God. But if we turn our hearts towards Him with the proper humility, because does God respond to other things? Sure, He does. The Lord responds to all kinds of things. It's just that, as far as I'm concerned, to knowingly approach God with arrogance is kind of, risky. Meaning that I risk not being answered. It's like, why should He answer that? And some people would say, like, well, is He so touchy? God's so touchy, He can't handle it. It's like, no, but it's like, I don't think that's it at all. It's just that you can't reward that kind of behavior. My kids are doing something obnoxious. I don't reward obnoxiousness. I don't reward brattiness. If they try to, talk to me a certain way, I don't put up with it. And so I'm certainly not going to give them what they want if they're going to, ask like a little brat. Someone who has no appreciation. And I could see people getting angry about that and saying, like, well, God has a lot to answer for all the things He's made in the world. Well, actually, no. God doesn't have to answer for anything, technically speaking. That's why it's such a blessing that God is good, because he doesn't have anyone to answer to, you know, just himself. You know, that's the problem with authority. You know, someone was talking about. I watched a video I'm gonna recommend actually, by I think his name is David Wood. I've seen him before. He's like Act 17 Apologetics. He's kind of like an interesting, intelligent guy. But he was talking about his experience because he's an ex-con and stuff with the police, a former criminal element turned Christian, and he was talking about why people hate the police. And I found it interesting because my only thought on it as far as the police go, and I told my kids and my wife, and I've always said for a long time, and you know, my family comes from an interesting background. Like, for us, you know, I watched my dad get arrested as a kid, and I never had any bad interactions with the police, but I've had some interactions. Never been arrested myself, and they were mostly good. I certainly try not to upset policemen whenever I encounter them, because as I told my family members, it's dangerous. They bear not the sword in vain. They have the power to do things to you. If you know what I mean, like, not that it's right necessarily, but they can do it and get away with it. And so I don't, you know, and the thing is, there is a certain element always that is attracted to authority for authority's sake. And a certain portion of that element is good intention, perhaps. Probably a significant portion of them are good intention. They want authority so they can do good. Good. But there's always going to be a certain amount of them who desire authority because they like to use authority, and they get power tripped off of it. And they get excited from, let's say, using their authority to hurt someone in a way that they sort of get away with. And there's an injustice there. That's always true. You know, that, and he did a good job breaking this down. It's the authority issue. There's an authority. When you put someone in authority over everything, you know, they say absolute power corrupts, or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. At least it works that way with men. That's the thing. It's like why we ought to be thankful that God is good, because he has absolute power. And he's the ultimate test. Is that really true? Among men, it's certainly true. You give someone absolute power, it corrupts. Not just that individual. From what I understand, that statement was even meant to apply to society, to the people. They continually accept. They will, you know, the more and more they're brutalized by their leaders, the more they will accept it and become corrupted by it. I think about what happened. It's almost depressing when I think about like the pandemic and stuff. It's the way people just rolled over. Not in the first month, but after the first month, when it became obvious that there was something wrong. The you know, the plague was not as advertised. You know, that was a little bait and switch there. And it's still going on. You know, the original things they said that we're just going to slow things down, flatten the curve, has turned into some weird thing where they don't really think everyone has to get sick, which is kind of what has to happen. Not maybe everyone, but eventually most people are going to have the disease. You know, it's just going to happen. They won't find a cure quick enough. To prevent everyone from getting the disease, you have to take some extraordinarily stupid steps, or you have to find a vaccine in the next few months, which is, whatever, not going to happen. And so many people are so freaked out by the vaccine. Rolling out this like rapidly deployed vaccine is a recipe for trouble, because being untested, there will be some cases that do not have good outcomes, and they will be held up as examples, and people will lose their minds. It's a dangerous thing. It's a dangerous world. There's an authority problem. You give people authority, some people don't use it right. They don't use it right. The power gives them, they get too, it goes to their head, essentially, as we would say, right? They start thinking, I don't know what they think. I don't know, because it's like, I would think, the more I've been given things, not exactly power, but it's a responsibility, the more conscientious I became, or the more conscious I became of the fact that I'd been given a responsibility. And that I thought of it as a responsibility. This is my responsibility. Like the earth is God's responsibility, and the world and they that dwell therein. I always say that God is ultimately responsible for everything. He takes responsibility for it. On some level. Because he judges it. You know what I mean? If God doesn't judge the world, that is the moment where he confronts each man and takes responsibility for his part in it. But what will that shake out to be, do you suppose? With God on the wrong side of judgment? No, sir. Shall not be. So I said, men ought to be thankful every day that God is good. Because it doesn't have to be. I'm just saying, like, in the realm of all possibilities, God could be malevolent. He isn't. Because a malevolent God, like I said, people generally come up with the thought there is no God. Because God is very quiet. You know what I mean? Like, they don't go right to God as malevolent, though you hear it in their speech. When they talk. When they talk about God as if he exists, even though they say they believe he doesn't exist, you get sort of, because sometimes they'll start talking like that. Some people will. And you'll see that in their understanding of God, they have a very distorted and negative view of God. And it's often due to a great deal of lack of understanding. Having a lack of understanding of God is going to lead us to potentially, run into contradictions in life that make our belief in God, that really challenge that belief in God down to the core. That, for me, has happened many times. Like I said, some people have greater faith, but it's like, I try to use it, make use of what God, of the challenges that he puts before me like that. Use it to try to answer the questions, to think about the things that people think about that cause them to doubt, and to find out, to me it's one fascinating, because it's like, everyone doesn't believe in God, right? And I've always believed in him, and I know why I started to believe in him, because that's why I was raised, but it's like the reason I still believe him has more to do with other reasons than I was raised that way. Because I don't think I could continue to do that. It's just like when I was talking to my wife about hell. It's like eternal torment. It sounds like that's like the end of the story, where it's like, it makes me think of like Solomon of the two mothers. The true mother did not want her child divided in half, but the other mother said, "Yeah, sure, fine, divide it in half. Give half to each of us. That sounds fair." People who say that remind me of people who are like, yeah, sure, torment him forever and ever. Sounds like a good idea to me. Divide the baby in half. Yeah, I mean, like, there's this horrific thing said, and it's almost like a test. Do you believe that? Literally? Took that literally. I don't. Divide the baby in half. No, let it not be so. Maybe the answer is supposed to be, you know what, put them out of their misery and kill me too. If it will suffice to appease your anger. Because such a thing should not be. Not literally. For he hath founded it upon the seas and established it upon the floods. For who shall ascend the hill of the Lord? Who shall stand in his holy place? God has a holy place, a hill. There's always like the holy hill of God, the mountain of God. We always have to ascend up to where God is. Moses ascended up the mountain. He conferred with God. He received the commandments. He received the law. He brought them down to the people. God descended on the mountain in smoke and fire. Jesus went up into the mountain, and then he sat down and taught them, saying, "Happy are the poor in spirit," etc. There's always this sort of like, and because of nature, often people speak from high places to be heard by groups of people. They would find some high place and get up there and speak. And also kings would set up their judgment seats on high places. There was always like a feeling of ascent up to the king's palace or to the temple of a god. They always put them on hills up high and prominent. At least for the most part. I mean, generally speaking, that's how it was set up. And so you would always experience this feeling of going up. Wish my camera wasn't behind like this. Give me a second here. But you always feel this "I'm going up" thing when you go into the temple. A lot of government buildings also, I've noticed, like county courthouses and stuff, are also set up high. It's and it's fine, and it just, we like to put these things prominent, but you go up to the place of judgment. Even in court, the judge, every court I've ever been in, I've been in a couple, the judge always sits much higher than everybody else, because he's sitting in the place of authority, of judgment. You know what I mean? Judgment, the place of judgment ought to be, I'm not saying it is, but it ought to be a holy place. And with God it is. A place of judgment ought to be holy. It ought to be separate. It should be distinct. It should not have the pollutions of this world. The respect of persons. The Bible talks about respect of persons, right? In many places. Like, it's a bad thing. You should not have judgment with respect of persons. Meaning, this guy's an important person in the community, so we apply a different standard to him. That shouldn't be. Also, like, this guy's a different race than the other guy, so we put a different standard to him. That shouldn't be. That's also respect of persons, because it's the most naked and basic kind of respect of persons. It's like, he's not from around here. He's not like us. He's not one of us. The law of God, I was looking it up not long ago just to confirm. It's like, but the law of God says you shall have one law. You're not supposed to have one law for, two laws, one for you and one for the stranger who comes into your land. You apply the same legal standard to everybody. That's why I don't think, when they say, like, American rights are only for American citizens, when people were saying that back when George W. Bush was president and they wanted to use waterboarding on people, and they're saying, like, well, due process doesn't apply. Well, not just waterboarding. That's arguable. I know some people don't think it's a big deal. Other people think otherwise. I tend to think it is a form of torture, of course. It's a light form, right? But not the kind of thing you would like carried out to eternity, and actually would probably kill you eventually, don't you think? You can't just keep having water poured on your face. That someone could succumb under those conditions? You don't think so? Absolutely, they could. So, anyways, one of the things about the American justice system, I think, that is important, is that we treat all men as equal before the law. All men, humans, no male or female implied there. So they're not, in our current, the way our laws are set up, that's not part of the law, any sort of distinction. At least in general with criminal justice. No, there's a distinction. Women get lighter sentences, don't they? They probably do. I bet they always do. They don't really go into that too much. That's okay. They're less often criminal. Right? But in the... what was I going to say about that? Equality on the law, sure. That'll be protected. Respect of persons, sure. Well, and race is the most basic kind of respect of persons. It's like he's not the kind of person we are. And so justice should not be characterized or, let's say, altered, perverted by things like that. But there's also like the respect of persons that goes just to someone who works in the system. I'm getting a little off, I think. Just because I've had this on my mind. So I don't think I want to go into that much more deeply than that. We have to go up to the place of judgment. It is a high place. It ought to be separate and holy. That was the main point, is that it should be a place that's clean. It's not always so. Justice is perverted. That's a terrible sin. You know what I mean? To pervert justice is a terrible sin. You know what I mean? Terrible. And it ought not to be done. Ought not to be done. In the holy place of God, where God judges, though, who can stand? Who can stand his justice? Who can stand it? I mean, who can stand up in the holy place of God, ascend into the hill, and stand there? Because the idea of standing implies withstanding. You know what I mean? To come out smelling like roses, so to speak. What's this? He that hath clean hands and a pure heart, who hath not lifted up his soul into vanity, nor sworn deceitfully, he shall receive the blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. The man with clean hands. There's another analogy. It's a poetic way of saying clean hands. Didn't got his hands dirty with all kinds of dirty deeds. It doesn't mean like, though. I mean, there's. I remember it makes me think when they said, Jesus, why do your disciples eat with unwashed hands? Is that what they mean? Literally? Yeah, I mean, I think this might be the kind of thing that caused the Pharisees to have the issue with washing hands. Meaning it's like, I woke up this morning, my hands are clean. I washed them before bed. I haven't been picking my nose or scratching myself in any of my parts that need more attention. I haven't been picking my teeth or, trying to clean my ear out with my fingertip or anything. I've been sleeping. They're clean, But the Pharisees had these like rituals of washing where they would like make sure, just like they wouldn't say the name of God to make sure they never took the name of God in vain. Well, they did extra washing before they approached God in any way, lest they be not clean enough. And maybe verses like this encourage that, if you take it literally. Though you shouldn't, I wouldn't want to come before God with quote unquote, with dirty hands per se, but I mean, just as if a man was laboring and he was a bit dirty, like I was out in the garden yesterday pulling up weeds and I was dirty. I was pretty dirty. I had mud all over my fingers, my shoes. I was dirty. Hands were dirty, but that's not the kind of dirtiness we're talking about. We're talking about the dirty hands that you get from doing dirty deeds. There's dirt there you can't see. All the things these hands have done. They look clean. They look clean outwardly. They do. Pretty clean. Just dry a little here and there. Because my hands are messed up. They're clean, but they're not. But are they clean? Are they morally clean? What have you been doing with your time? What have you been doing with your labor? What have you been putting your hand to? Now, these are the kind of questions. How clean as you stand before God, how clean are your hands? And your heart? My heart's pure. It's got nothing but heart tissue in it. What do you mean? Does it mean cardiac problems? A pure heart? One that isn't clogged? Its arteries not clogged with fat? Is that what it means by pure heart? So I don't get a heart attack? When I stand before God and I see his awesome power and I check out right then and there? That could happen. Yeah, no man can see God and live, and now I know why. Because he scared me to death just to be in his presence. Some people, I don't know, maybe to some it seems irreverent, but it's not. Not from my perspective. I mean, I could see like the feeling of it. For some people, God is like a subject you don't really talk about, and when you do, you whisper or something. I don't know. It's never been like that for me. If I can't make fun of the things people think a little bit about God, and I don't mean to degrade anybody in doing that, though I realize I do it sometimes without thinking, but talking lightly about men's thoughts helps me understand better. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes it gives me room to, people have to be able to think and express themselves in a way that helps us come to a better understanding. It certainly helps me. But a pure heart, I'm going to stand before God and it's like, what has my heart been longing after? What has my heart been lusting for? Where is my heart right now as I stand before God? Where is it? I was thinking about the words of another song the other day. And I was, I was thinking about the, people bowing. People are taking a knee for the new religion, but also trying to sort of show solidarity with people who are experience violence at the hands of the police. On that level, I can understand, but the problem is who are the people in whose presence is this really happening, and to whom is this bowing being done, and for what purpose? There's something a bit. I'm not a big fan of bending the knee to anyone but God. You know what I mean? It's a very anti-American thing in my mind. Americans don't bow. I might bow at the, I don't mind doing a Japanese style bow. Like showing a respect, tilt the head, slightly forward bow. I thought that's, in Japan, I believe that's just a sign of mutual respect. You know what I mean? I don't know. So, like that kind of thing, well, sure, I don't mind a little bit of respect shown to other people. Or solidarity, kind of, whatever. But bowing the knee, getting down on your knees. I do kneel with, wrestling and stuff. We get down on our knees. Take a knee, that kind of thing. And I know actually that's sort of what that protest originally started out as, when the guy was taking his knee, the football player. He would take the knee, and it was sort of like sitting out. You know what I mean? But now it seems to be something else. And what annoys me is actually I see people bowing, right? They're kneeling, showing whatever. But it's like, as far as I know, all of that symbolically represents is blaming all injustice on the United States of America as a whole. When injustice is always the product of individuals. Sometimes there's a system that exists that protects those individuals who bring about those injustices. And that's another injustice, and that is systematic injustice. Meaning the system is protecting. But that doesn't mean that the righteous standards are wrong, or that there should be no justice, or no attempt to bring about justice. You can't just dismantle justice. You can, but then you'll have no justice at all. Whereas in a justice system, you often have a mixture of justice and injustice. If you have no justice system at all, you will only have injustice. You're not going to have your justice, instead of justice and an occasional injustice, you will have justice and injustice heaped upon each other in a cycle of revenge and reprisals that would make your head spin. But we don't understand that sometimes in this country because we haven't lived through that. And a lot of people haven't read history, or even just books, novels, things people wrote based on their experiences about what life is like on the world at different times and in different situations, how people get. People don't think that it could be them. When I walk through this world, and I see the way everyone just obediently follows orders. And I think, these people are all ready to just march their fellow citizens into gas chambers. They're already ready there. I don't believe that if they don't have the one, I think they do have the internal goods to stand up to this, but they don't, because they don't really understand. They don't have the knowledge. So that's critical. So if they don't have the knowledge now, why are they going to have the knowledge later when something else happens? They're going to stand up then? Maybe they would. But I can already see there's so many willing to bend the knee rather than to stand up. It's kind of depressing. I literally hate going to town. I hate going to the store. I feel like staying home all the time. I don't, but it's like I do. I feel like just staying away from town. For a while I'd hoped that I would go around defiant, but as time goes on, I feel like I see fewer people. Of course, maybe it's a byproduct of me not being in town so much. That's true too. So I got to be careful. Yeah, be careful of your perceptions; they can lead you astray. A pure heart. To stand before God with a pure heart. My heart is only pure in relative circumstances. It's like I wish my heart was pure. My motives for certain things are pure. I think my motives for teaching the Bible are pure. Pure? Are they pure? Yeah, they're pure. Because I have no alternative. I don't really. I still don't have any kind of. I thought about setting up, and I may still yet actually, because of financial issues, and it's because I'm trying to do a lot of work that's the songs I've been writing politically and stuff, and I'm thinking of if things don't change, it's in the next year I do have an opportunity to move into more full-time work in service, in which case it's then I would not think it wrong to take what is due from service, if that happens. But our hearts, to really stand before God, we have to have a pure heart. We have to say, purify my heart, let it be as gold and precious silver, right? We want our hearts purified. It's interesting. We ask God to purify our hearts. There's other calls in the scripture for men to purify their hearts. How does this happen? How does God purify my heart? I know God purifies my heart through the sacrifice of Christ. He purifies our hearts. But is that merely symbolic? Meaning he does it judicially, as I have often said, through now when you come before God, your heart is regarded as pure because of your faith in Christ. I've often, God, one of the things when I started my online teachings with Romans a decade ago, in that first study, the oldest thing I have online is Romans. I have studies from before. They're all from before 2005. Actually, I have cassettes. I have tons of cassettes. I never bothered to rip them because there's so many, and it's so old. It'll be interesting for me to listen to it, honestly, because I'm, to see what I say beyond, the things that I know I thought with Arnold Murray, but when I was studying scriptures that had no bearing on any area of disagreement, because I wasn't particularly disagreeable at the time. I questioned things, but it's if you listen to them, you wouldn't think anything amiss, I think, necessarily, at least as far as my intentions. But I have all these, and you go back to Romans in 2009, and I said there are certain things that I think are neglected that we ought to study, we ought to give attention to, we ought to have more heed to. Certain things in the scriptures. And that was the point of the study. It's like and what it was sin. That was the main thing. It was because I felt like I, as a Christian, had lost track of what of what sin was. Not just sin, of course, but righteousness. And mostly the call to righteousness, the call that God calls us away from sin. And that the purifying of our heart is not to be merely a symbolic or a gesture. That it's supposed to be something that actually happens where my heart gets cleaned up and my thoughts get taken captive. It's not something, otherwise, here's the thing. If by the sacrifice of Christ alone, this was accomplished in every way, because I do understand that in some way it is accomplished in the sacrifice of Christ, that my heart is purified, and the works are finished from the foundation of the world. But also it remains that they must be accomplished and actually come to be. Every Christian believes that ultimately there's a resurrection, and that we all return from the dead, and we all stand before God in judgment. Right? And that from that point forward, when we enter into the kingdom of God, there won't be any more sin. So we all know we're headed in that direction. So we all know that it has to happen. Your heart has to actually become pure. Your hands must actually be clean. And stay clean. It's not like he's going to keep coming forever to wash them away again. No, his sacrifice paid for all time. And there's no sin additional that is going to be committed that is not, that does not already fall under the power of the forgiving power of his sacrifice. And there's no sin that man could commit that doesn't fall under it, that is not covered by it. Yet, my heart needs to be purified. Not just declared pure, not just imputed with righteousness, but it actually I have to live it. And maybe purify my heart. Or as Paul, if that wasn't true, why would Paul say things like taking captive every thought and bringing them into obedience to Christ? You have to take captive your thoughts and bring them into obedience to Christ. There's something to be done. It's not always so easy for man to do, and sometimes it's a work that takes time. Sometimes you don't even realize some thoughts you have are sin, or you don't even see them when you have them. People are complicated. Who has not lifted up his soul into vanity, nor sworn deceitfully. And lifting up your soul into vanity sounds like idolatry to me, right? It is a reference to idolatry. Because in idolatry, the idols of the heathen are vanity. They're nothing. They're emptiness. That's why I'm guessing vanity is aven in Hebrew. Aven or aven. When there was a place called Bethel where Jacob slept on the pillar, and he said, "This is the house of God," and he called it Bethel. And there was also a place in the history of Israel that was called Bethel, and I think it was the same place. I'm not certain, but I think it is. It's called Bethel. It was a hill, mountain. A minor mountain, and as mountains go in Israel, right? You know what I mean? Like the Mount of Olives is not a tremendously large mountain. You know what I mean? I almost forgot I was looking up a word. Vanity. Sorry, I meant to bring you along here. I will do that right now. Remedy that. Vanity. Shav. It's the other one. Oh, this is Shav. This is the other one. It means emptiness and vanity, though, as you can see right here. Let's see what but it's not aven. I guessed at it and I guessed wrong. Shav. Falsely, lying, vanity. From the same as show. Which is also from the same that I was going to say, from which they get the idea of the Shoah, which is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust. The Shoah, Shav, Shoah. Desolating evil, destructive, ruin. figuratively idolatry. And that's what that's what I was saying. That this is meant figuratively here in the Psalms. This time, the figurative meaning is primary here. He has not lifted up his soul unto empty things, which refers figuratively to idols. But in referring to them lifting up his soul unto vanity, instead of saying to idols, it gives us a little insight, doesn't it, on what modern equivalents might be. Lifting up your soul to vanity. The Bible, from time to time, talks about souls being lifted up. You know what I mean? My soul, I lift up my soul to the Lord. My soul was lifted up within me. There's a certain exaltation, doesn't that? Doesn't that sound like exaltation? My soul lifted up. My soul was lifted up within me. I exalted. That's what the meaning is. And so to exalt your soul, to lift up your soul to vanity, what is that figurative of? Well, if we think of it in terms of idolatry, it means to serve idols. But when I think of, it also makes me think of actually a lot of the pop culture obsessed people I notice in the world, who take comic books seriously and the comic book characters. And when I was a kid, I collected comic books. I was a little bit weird about it because I remember my dad didn't really like it. My dad, it was weird because we had an interesting take on things because he was, like I said, when he was growing up, his dad taught him, here's how you bribe a policeman. That was our relationship with the police as far as my family, on that side of the family. I think I've said it before, but it's like on my Italian side, I think I'm descended from bandits because stringini means something like squeezy. And all my, I can't help but notice, my father, my grandfather and his father, they had very powerful builds, those men did. Broad-chested. And the region they came from was known for lawlessness since ancient times. So, I don't know. I think that name sounds a little bit suspicious. But anyways, as I've said, there's a... But my dad's take on things like comic books, music videos, he always was like, I could tell he didn't like it. So it made me question those things. He never forbid them wisely. He wisely did not forbid it, but just expressed his distaste. I think that was wise. Because they're not so obviously idolatrous. You know what I mean? Just as a grove of trees, like a lot of times the things are called groves, and it's disputed whether or not it was like some sort of phallic image in the midst of a grove of trees. But there was one where it says there's a scripture where it talks about they find a nice grove in a place, and this is a great place to worship God, and they set up an idol and they do it. You know what I mean? And they turn it into the ritual, but beneath the ritual is a certain lifting up of the soul, but to something that isn't God, to something that is ultimately nothing. Idolatry is basically the worshiping of nothing instead of God, of something that is actually nothing, but it is somehow taking the place of God. You know what I mean? And that's why sometimes with the comic book enthusiasts or the superhero people, it's the same kind of people, right? Sometimes, it seems, it depends. I can't think of anyone I saw where I thought this is definitely idolatry, right? I can't think of anyone where I was certain of it. But like my father, I have had feelings of distaste. You know what I mean? where I feel like, you're a little too committed to this. Because some of them I hear them describe it as the myths of their times, and these things have substituted the stories the superheroes engage in have substituted for the stories of the Old Testament or the New. The moral beliefs of their superheroes have substituted for the moral beliefs that they would receive of God. Though often in the old way, they were very similar. You know what I mean? And I notice mostly the obsession when I see people trying to change their heroes from like maybe a hero that is molded in the Christian way. Because most of the heroes that were written in the past, the fictional heroes, they were written in the Christian mold. Written in a culture informed by Christianity and whose stories are embedded in that tradition and still follow along until similar, the morals to the story are the same morals. And they get upset, though, when someone comes in and they try to change these things. And I've seen this. And this is where it occurred to me. I'm like, this is like they're messing with their gods. You know what I mean? This ought to be the place they give to the true God. But this comic book story has become a sort of like a substitute God. They don't think of it as God, but it is fulfilling God's role in their life. I mean, it's their book. It is their religion. You know what the word religion means? I think I mentioned this. Religion. It means to read again. To repeat, essentially. Because at the heart of religion are certain repeated facts which are believed and taken on faith. And now that doesn't mean you don't have a reason. Like I said, I believe in the resurrection of Jesus, not just because of what's in the Bible, not just because of the implications of things like the Shroud of Turin, but because I prayed in his name and he responded. And that told me, oh, he is alive. That tells me he's alive, because it's like I have contact with the man. But the Almighty God of heaven responded to me when I called on the name of Jesus. Now, there could be some other explanation, but to me, that's the one that makes the most sense to me and is the most pragmatic to follow. Yeah, I mean, like, I don't want to, I'm not going to be a fool and just question everything to my own destruction. Yeah, I mean, like, questioning goes so far. But men lift their soul to vain, empty things, the things that are not God. Their souls are lifted up in it. I've noticed this in sports. It's like when I was into sports, like the exultation I give when my sports team won. Right? I think these are small and often harmless shadows of what can become idolatry. If God does not occupy the proper place in our life, something else will come in and will begin to fill out that emptiness like a god. So a comic book superhero that's merely meant to be an entertaining story can become like a substitute for God for some people because they have no God. And so the closest thing begins to take the shape of God in their lives and becomes thus so important to them. That's why there's so much cultural trouble, because even though they know not the Christian God, many people still cling to gods who are in the shape of the Christian God. They like that shape still. They still have an affinity for that shape. Because, I mean, the Christian religion is the most popular in the world and is still, maybe not the fastest growing, but it's still growing. It's also shrinking in some places, but overall it's still growing. And it's not growing merely because of births. Like some religions. Some religions grow because of births. They have more births, so they have more people growing up in their religion. nor sworn deceitfully. This is important to swear deceitfully. Swearing deceitfully is very bad because you invoke God. To swear, Jesus said, "Let your nay be nay and your yea be yea. Don't swear at all," because you can't add one thing to your life or not. It's funny. I thought we would finish this psalm, and I just got bogged down. Oh well. That's fine. We'll go on to the next psalm, and then whatever. To me, it's just like this. It's so funny because it's just such a simple concept, but there's so much to it. It's so simple, yet there's so much to it. When we swear, we invoke God. It's not you're not swearing if you haven't sworn by God or by something. You know what I mean? You're invoking something. A swear and a curse are very similar. They're just kind of like the opposites. In a swear, you bring in some authority. Sometimes swearing is like a curse, though. Like Jesus says, don't swear by your own head, because you can't make one hair white or black. If I swear by my own head, what does that mean? It means I'm sort of saying, if I don't do this thing, then let me be killed. That's swearing by my head. Then let my life pay for it. If I do not perform my word, that's swearing. And but it's also sort of a curse. You're saying, "Let me be damned," almost. It's like, so. Often in either one, cursing and swearing are very closely akin. It's not really any different per se, except the idea of cursing implies a curse, and swearing implies invoking a deity as witness, which also implies that if I am not telling the truth, then the witness is going to take it out on me. It's inviting God to punish you if you're lying. That's what swearing does. So I just said, don't do it. Don't swear. Let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and that's enough. As it said, I will pay your vows. You make promises, a little different though. Swearing. When one swears deceitfully, it destroys judgment. It destroys justice. People who lie under oath. People who invoke God's name as a way of covering for their own lies and making them more convincing. I'm going to swear, but in a deceitful way, so that people believe me, even though I'm not telling the truth. It's a very wicked thing to do, is it not? To swear deceitfully. But this is the one who will receive the blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of his salvation. The one who does these things, the clean hands, pure heart, doesn't lift his soul to vanity, doesn't swear deceitfully, that is the man, the human. You always understand. It's like, I like to just say the man, because I mean the human being, as we are all men, male or female, bond or free, Jew nor Greek, black nor white, etc., 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 all men. All men we are. I want to receive the blessing from the Lord and righteousness from the God of my salvation. Receive righteousness from God. Does that mean changing my behavior? Well, I think what it means here is actually a righteous sentence. We get blessing from God and a righteous sentence from God. Though everything God does is righteousness, the wicked, when they appear before the judgment of God, think it not so. They think the judgment of God is unfair. They think the judgment of God is unjust because they are judged faulty. But those who are judged, but the thing is, ultimately in the judgment, those who stand, like I said, I don't have the clean hands, the pure heart. My soul has been lifted to vanity. I've probably sworn deceitfully, can't recall exactly any specific things, but it's like, at some point probably did. At some point I probably said, swear to God, and it wasn't true. At some point I must have done that. I'm pretty sure I did, actually. I don't know, did I? I don't recall. I'm thinking like as a kid, I may have, it's like kids are all little liars. Not all. Some kids are really good. How am I going to stand before God on those, with those things? One, Jesus' sacrifice. Two, the work of God in me. The work of God brings about those things so that whatever, even if I'm not perfectly so, God sees that out of a clean conscience, I have tried to do what he said. I wanted to follow. I have longed after your word. I have attempted to carry out your commands. I wanted to keep it. Psalm 119 takes you back and forth from all those things. It's like a lost sheep. I've gone astray. Heal thy servant. But I have loved your commandments. I've meditated on them day and night. I'm totally into your law, to your word. I listen. And yet I'm still not the man I ought to be if I should stand before you on my own merits. I cannot stand on my own merits before God. I must stand on the merits of Christ. And then the work of Christ in me being the proof of that election, because he knows me. Oh yeah, I've been working with you. I know. Now all the things you yet lack, you shall have. But like I often say, I want to get as much of that as I can right now, and there's nothing to say I can't have some of it, if not 90. Is there some part that needs to be reserved for the resurrection? 1%, 2%? I'm not going to assume I did it on my own merits in any case. It's not going to lift me up to receive the blessing from the Lord and a righteous sentence before God. Okay, so, and it's kind of just, honestly, it just goes into this end. We're 7 minutes over. We will quickly probably go over these verses. Not that quickly, but, probably 10, 15 minutes. And then go into Psalm 25, which is a nice long psalm, which will take several studies anyways. So we'll pick it up in verse 6. We'll have to talk a little bit about the generation that seeks him, but fortunately we've gone over in detail these very simple concepts which have, it's a simple thing to say, have clean hands, have a pure heart. It's not so simple to carry it out, is it? So, and part of carrying it out, someone quoted to me recently, my people perish for lack of knowledge. We have to know. We have to learn. What does it mean? Clean hands, what does that really mean? Pure heart, what's that really mean? And how can we obtain it? I can see my camera's lagging badly today. It always seems to happen whenever I reboot my computer. Anyways. Well, there, I put the scriptures away. I didn't need to do that. But we will see you or I'll be back tomorrow. I won't see you, but you can see my face right here. Thanks for joining me, and I'll be back again tomorrow. Lift up your